Today,
Morning.
today's August the 31st, 2025. My name is Harry Ricker, and this is the Cosmology Discussion Group. And I want to welcome everybody here on a Labor Day weekend. More people here than I thought there'd be. Um, so, Roger Anderton is going to talk to us today about why Einstein's theory of relativity became accepted. We just sort of talked a little bit about that last week, and people seem to be interested in that topic, and Roger is certainly interested in telling us about it. So I'm sure we'll have some conversation relating to this topic. So, Roger, go ahead and take it away.
Do you have to share screen with me or something?
I just allowed your request to share screen.
Yeah. Is it
And
there?
now you have to click on your presentation or the window where your presentation is, and then you have to click share screen.
Sure, sure. Oh, here we go. There. Shit, brilliant. Can you see that? Do you see that then?
There
Yeah,
we
no
go.
loading. Yeah, excellent. We're getting somewhere. Let's see if I can go to that slideshow off. Oh, there we go. Slideshow. Is that big?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Okay, so start talk now. Thank you for letting me give this talk. There's lots of reasons why Einstein's relativity became accepted, and I'll just go through some of them, uh, the ones that I've looked at. So I can't see how to get the next page. Oh, 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 oh. So I try to escape. I'll go back, spoiler. So can you still see that?
We see the first slide.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
you see the second one? Oh,
Yeah.
Yep.
is it what I, yeah, what I got is your faces are in the way, so
You
try
can
to
move the you can move us off to the
yeah,
right side of the
I've
screen.
moved you down so I can read it now. Hopefully you can all see it. So
Okay.
starting off, it's the usual reason as to why Einstein's relativity was accepted was because it was said to be confirmed by experiments, and it's the ones we're familiar with, the Michelson-Morley experiment and Eddington's light bending observations, etc. But I'm
Now
not by.
Eddington was much later. That was many years later.
Yeah, but Einstein became famous in 1919, and
True.
that's when they sort of like backtracked it and believed all of it. Then the
Mhm.
special general relativity was supposed to be confirmed by Eddington, and then they bought that, and then they bought the idea of special relativity as well from earlier, 1905. So the whole of Einstein's relativity was sort of like started to be accepted by a lot of people from 1919 onwards. But I'm not buying it. Experiments could be interpreted by different ways and not necessarily by Einstein's relativity. And experiments could be made to align with Newtonian physics better. So if you got this observation of light bending in 1919, you could actually look at Newton's theory of physics and try to work out a way of combining that into Newtonian physics. But they didn't go with that. They decided, oh, Newton is wrong. Let's go with Einstein's theory of relativity. So I would have expected a big debate on that in 1919 onwards, but there wasn't. There was sort of like when it was announced at the uh, Royal Academy of Science of in uh, England, they were just told to accept that Einstein's relativity was correct. And so where was the big debate on arguing over these different theories as to what could explain Eddington's observations, and they didn't really go into that. They just went ahead and just accepted Einstein's relativity based on that, and that's very dubious. But anyway, the issues like that have been dealt with others in numerous other videos and papers from our group. So the real reason, though, seems to me it was the strange political and philosophical changes that were taking place around that time, which was in the earlier 20th century. And certain people wanted a radical break with Newtonian physics, and they became supporters of Einstein. So part of that break was what was coming about by Darwin. There was people who didn't want to have religion as part of science. They wanted God taken out. And I think to a large extent that Einstein could be seen as taking God out of physics, because in Newton you had God as a clockmaker. The universe was clockwork, and so God was the clockmaker. But when they transferred their course over to Einstein relativity in the hopes of getting rid of God, it still does creep back in again with things like the Big Bang. Sort of like if the universe came into existence precisely from a Big Bang, well, who started the Big Bang? So they couldn't get rid of God entirely, but it was an attempt to try to do that. And Einstein was what I thought could help do that. Anyway, moving on. So there were people pro the changes made to physics by Einstein, and there were people anti that change. And of course, we know the people that were pro won. But it's when you look into it, why should they win? They shouldn't really. So I'm going by this website, and it's deals with philosophy of science. In the case of Einstein, he read a lot of philosophy, and that was influencing his approach to physics. And at the time, there was a lot of these German philosophers coming forward and saying lots of strange things. So this is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And so it's pointing out that Einstein uh, is well known as the most prominent physicist of the 20th century. His contributions to 20th century philosophy of science, though of comparative importance, are less well known. So really, what Einstein was a part of was a change in the philosophy of science. And he was going by a contribution of a lot of these other philosophers. And it mentions I'm not going to mention the names, but it mentions these other philosophers. So it was a big philosophical change of the philosophy of science, basically. And you were either for that change or you wanted to keep things as they were. So jumping to the conclusion of that article. And so it's kind of the conclusion about it. Einstein was both philosopher and physicist. Einstein's influence on 20th century philosophy of science is comparable to his influence on 20th century physics. And that's by a philosopher, Howard, who's writing in 2014. So you're not just talking about a big change in physics with Einstein, you're talking about a big change in the philosophy of physics. And so this conclusion wants to go on and ask, what made that possible? One explanation looks to the institutional and discipline of history of theoretical physics and the philosophy of science. Each was in its own domain a new mode of thought in the latter 19th century. So in the latter 19th century, these philosophical ideas of which could affect science were being discussed by the philosophers. Philosophers of science helped to legitimize theoretical physics by locating the significant cognitive content of science in its theories. Theoretical physicists helped to legitimize the philosophy of science, providing for analysis is for analysis of subject matter that is radically reshaping our understanding of nature and the place of humankind within it. So what you got is the philosophy of science and theoretical physics, and they're both being complementary to each other. So you've got this big change being brought about by Einstein. And so if I'm skipping on a bit more, and another explanation looks to the education of young physicists in Einstein's day. Not only was Einstein's own youthful reading heavily focused on philosophy, he's deep into philosophy, and the philosophy of science in particular. You need to go and read Einstein for what his philosophy things is. An obvious question is whether or not the early cultivation of a philosophical habit of mind made a difference in the way Einstein and his contemporaries approached physics. So, with Einstein, the way you're approaching physics is radically changing. So, when you're thinking of things of progress, so you're changing the main philosophy of science of physics along with the theory of physics, and they're both complementing each other. So, as I was putting out, its philosophy is a great influence on Einstein's thinking, and I've in other talks I've been dealing with what artificial intelligence has been saying a lot, and it's got into becoming part of my habit to look to see what artificial intelligence says about things. And so it's in those other talks I pointed out that mainstream physicists in general don't consider metaphysics important and don't care if it's a mess. And so metaphysics is the bit beyond physics. When you think of physics, you can think of experiments and checking to see whether it fits in with theory and fits in with the mathematics you've got. But the metaphysics is the bit beyond what you can actually test. And so it's more deeper into the side of philosophy of the physics then. So I asked what school of philosophy considers that if the metaphysics of a physical theory is confused, then the theory is wrong. So I'm talking about in this context, is the metaphysics of Einstein a mess? And I'm asking, is there any sort of philosophy school thinks that? And AI answered the school that explicitly insists metaphysical fusion means the theory is wrong is mainly the Aristotle realism system, and that's carried into modernity by scientific realists with a metaphysical bent, and it suggests like Meerson and some other neo-Aristotelians. So basically, this is what Einstein is doing to us. He's changing the way you think of the philosophy of physics. And before Einstein, you would have been trying to think in terms of what was called Aristotelian realism. So that all gets chucked out the window with Einstein. So the way you think about physics is now totally different to how you're supposed to do it before Einstein. And when us distance, we start arguing that Einstein doesn't make any sense. Well, I think a lot of us are thinking from the order philosophy of physics. And so, of course, it doesn't make sense from the order of philosophy. You've got to go to the newer philosophy of physics, which Einstein is part of. So this is where all the big mess is happening. When we dissidents start arguing about Einstein's relativity being nonsense, it's sort of like we're not hitting the deep problem of there's been a really big major change in the philosophy of physics. When we start arguing over things like, well, Einstein's mathematics doesn't make sense, yeah, of course you can point to parts of things where Einstein his maths doesn't make sense, but amendments to the maths, then that's not really so what the relativists, the physicists are thinking about. They don't really mind amending the mathematics a bit. It's sort of like the deep core thing that they believe in, which is their philosophy, their way of thinking, and that's never going to change from just pointing out a few math mistakes. Next. And so I asked it, when did this change from that philosophy happened? And it's pointing out it sort of like happened between 1890, 1890 and 1930. And Einstein was a part of that. With you got Mach, who was a great physicist bloke. He was thinking a lot of philosophy stuff. And then Einstein comes along with his philosophy stuff. And it's part of what you'd call logical positivism. And after that, the reigning philosophy of science no longer required metaphysical clarity for a theory to count as good science. So you're allowing your description of physics when you talk about things like, relativistic mass, time dilation, and length contraction. It might not all fit together in a coherent way, but that doesn't matter because the philosophy that they've swapped to doesn't really care about that. It doesn't demand that there should be metaphysical clarity of a theory to be anymore. But previously to this big philosophical change, they were demanding that the theory had to be coherent and make sense. So the change came with Einstein's relativity, and basically all these horrible things happening is supportive of Einstein's point of view of things. So as far as the mainstream was concerned, it had some mass that could be fitted to some experiments, and then that was good enough. And the philosophy they were going by, it did not matter if that metaphysics made no sense, which means the description. The and by mathematical they seem to allow mistakes being made in the math and then supposedly correcting the math. So when I've argued with people who believe in Einstein's relativity, even if they accept that there's mistakes in Einstein's maths, they would say, "Oh, that's been corrected later on by other people." So attacking it from mathematics doesn't help. It doesn't impress people who are devout believers in Einstein's relativity, while trying to have a good description of what's going on is just metaphysics to be ignored by these people. And so concepts like time dilation, space-time curvature, etc., are difficult to grasp and difficult to follow into a coherent description. But that gets ignored as metaphysics. And while the concentration is on the math, that is why some dissidents complain that science stroke physics become too mathematical with Einstein. But it seems to miss out the point that the really big thing was the metaphysics had changed. So Einstein's physics is protected by the change in philosophy that he brought about. His theory was not subject to the old philosophy of science that would have discarded his theory as being nonsense. So what happens when he becomes famous? He changes he was making to the physics paradigm was strongly resisted, and the main person who was resisting that was Leonard. So we get to this. So this is Leonard, and Leonard had, well, the way he's portrayed now, he got a big head, he's a egotist and so forth, and he believed he was, you see, a genius and so forth. But he was a Nobel Prize winner in physics, so he was a very outstanding physicist at the time, and he was resisting the changes that Einstein was bringing about. So when you've got a case, this is the main traditionalist of keeping physics the same and don't change to what Einstein is doing. So you can look at it, the things as a fight between the traditionalists, as spearheaded by Philip Leonard, and you've got the progressives who want change, who are represented by Einstein. Einstein is part of this group of progressives who wants the change in physics, while Leonard is seeing that change as being a corruption of physics. But the traditionalists are seen as people who resist progress. And so when the professors come along, that they don't that's their attack on it. They want a change, and when they make their change to physics, they then restrict that to they want another change which is better than what they've got. And if you're trying to make a change back to, say, Newtonian physics, they're resisting that because it's a backwards change rather than a forward change. So they've got their way of thinking about it. So who exactly were these progressives? Well, Einstein was part of a really big network of people because he was a political activist. And his views, I think, are socialism. So he had a lot of people who were supporting his progressive ideas. But Leonard was against that. So I have a video to show what happened. And basically, it all gets tied down to politics now because you've got the progressives versus the traditionalists, those who want change in the political in the government, and those versus those who want to keep things the same. And so, of course, the opposition to Einstein failed in the long term. It was a fight between progressives wanting change, represented by Einstein, versus traditionalists wanting to keep things the same, as represented by Leonard. So those who wanted to keep things the same were seen as initially resisting progress. But of course, as the argument continued, it just gets worse because Leonard, he was not able to impress upon people that you didn't need this change. The newspapers and so forth were glorifying Einstein and making out that this relativity was all very good and making progress. And so there wasn't the big thing from the newspapers saying, we don't need this change. So Leonard wasn't getting the big publicity like Einstein was getting in the newspapers. So Einstein basically had a big publicity campaign, and Leonard eventually failed. But when when Leonard fails on that, he starts becoming more radical in his belief. It's sort of like he starts thinking then of a Jewish conspiracy, and hence he starts joining the Hitler people, and he becomes a Nazi. So the whole point of that then is becoming you're either for Einstein, who's opposing the Nazis, or you're against Einstein, and that making you a Nazi. So that's the big split that comes about. The traditionalist in that part, I think, from Leonard was gets corrupted by this stuff with the Nazis. So it explains things a lot better in this video I can show you if I got time in this segment. So if I can start that video now.
How long is it? We've
About
only got um looks like 17 minutes.
yeah, that's about it's about 20 minutes, so we can start it and then carry on in the next segment. So uh so how do I stop? I stop this share and I got to go to another share.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, I'm not sure which one it is. There, I'll go to that one and hopefully I can move over to the other one. Can you see that? It's young Einstein and oh, that's the wrong one. I'll go to this other one. Yeah, it's can you see that? Dark matters.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right, we start that and we're gonna run out of time. So this video starts with glorifying Einstein with his new physics, which is relativity, and saying how much a genius it is. And then it's pointing out this Leonard is an idiot. Right. So are we going
I
to
think
get
it's
to?
mute. Roger, it's the loudspeaker is X. It's mute.
I don't know. I might have to silence my speaker, isn't it? Ah, so how do I silence my speaker?
It might be all right now. Don't know. Try playing.
Okay, there's no audio.
So how can I shrink it? Stop sharing. So if I, what is it? I turn my,
Okay,
I think when you share, there is a little tiny button somewhere that says allow the audio to come out. And you have to affirm, affirm that.
still no audio.
okay.
But the guy looks very grim. He looks like he's a very unhappy man.
He looks a bit like Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may need to go back, and when you share, there's a little toggle switch, and you have to say allow audio as well.
Okay, I'm going to propose that we postpone this until the next session.
Okay.
Does anybody have any comment? Do you have anything else after this video here that
No,
we
that
can?
was it, the video.
What
Okay.
was the point of the video? If you could just tell us.
The point of the video, the point is to highlight how the mainstream represents it, because it's a fight between what was really Leonard, the top scientist of the day, physicist of the day, versus Einstein, who was a relative unknown at that time in 1919. And so it's the way it's presented is this Leonard is a bigot, a racist, and so forth, and he's fascist and Nazi, and is a very unpleasant, nasty person. And so Einstein is coming up with this revolutionary new physics, and he's being resisted by Leonard and people like him who are following Leonard. And Einstein, it's sort of like Einstein is a sweet, nice, innocent person, and he manages to get this change to physics. Was like Leonard and his people are trying to retard science. They're trying to stop progress. And that's the way it's presented to us. So the way it's way so the way, as I say, the way it's presented to us, this all this Einstein, the big hype about him being a genius and so forth, and so he had this big fight to get accepted by us, and it's
Well, that doesn't explain why the man in the video looks so unhappy.
oh,
I mean, if he's the winning guy,
well, no,
why is he so,
that's not Leonard. That's the announcer. That's the presenter.
yeah,
What
the
you
presenter, the
yeah
guy
this
that we saw in the video,
yeah so
not
what
Leonard.
yeah
The guy that was
yeah
laying down the law, so to speak,
yeah
reading the Riot Act or whatever he was doing.
yeah so
Well, these are things leading up to the Second World War, perhaps. I think
yeah
Leonard dismissed it as Jewish science or something like that,
that's
as
it
against
yeah
Aryan science or German
yeah
science.
yeah
But if you go back to 1919, you didn't
no
mention that a number of things happened in 1919. It was the end of a struggle
the World War
which
One
had resulted in millions and millions of deaths. The most violent conflict between so-called civilized nations that had ever occurred. It shocked people.
yeah
And there'd been the Russian Revolution and the German Revolution at the end of the war.
yeah
And a lot of things were happening. the beginning of the Irish War of Independence also started in 1919. So everything was in turmoil, and perhaps people wanted to forget about the past, the good old 19th century when civilized nations, like Britain and Germany, would never go to war against each other. And that's an interesting point because there you have an English scientist, Eddington, teaming up with a German scientist, Einstein, to establish this new dispensation. And that was very attractive for people to latch onto.
Yeah,
Was
that's
Eddington Jewish or Christian or what?
sorry.
Eddington.
Well, that's interesting as well, because Eddington was actually, well, Christian. He was a Quaker, and he was a pacifist. He wouldn't take up arms during the First World War, as pacifists
Yeah.
will. And he was in danger of being imprisoned, as a lot of people in Britain were. For example, Bertrand Russell was imprisoned in Brixton.
Yeah.
But the authorities in Cambridge were adamant that they wanted him to continue his research. And they approached the government, and they had actually an annual agreement, I understand. It only lasted for a year. It had to be renewed maybe twice or three times. They said, look, if you don't imprison Sir Arthur Eddington, we'll make sure that at the end of the war, he will enhance relationships between British science and German science. And he'll endeavour to help the war effort by doing research during it. So they said, okay, we'll give him a year dispensation, but he'll be imprisoned after that. But then Cambridge renewed the agreement for another. So Eddington wasn't actually imprisoned, but he was a pacifist. Which most of the other Christians, by the way, were the most militant people, but the Quakers were pacifists, as you know. Einstein was of Jewish origin, as you know. He wasn't really a practicing Jew, but
I've looked a bit at the Quakers, and they haven't really taken the Bible as authoritative. If you're a proper Christian, you would take the Bible as authoritative. So that's probably why they're going bit more against certain ideas, which a Christian would take them more differently. And also Einstein, he was at that time was a pacifist. What he became later was a bit more complicated, but at that time he was blaming Germany for starting World War One, or what was called then the Great War. So he was looked favorably on as a good German from the West. So you've got this kind of joining together of two pacifists, and it's supposed to be, physics can work or science can work with the union between Germany and England, even though there's a war going on. The science community, there's still sort of unity. But in Germany, Einstein was looked upon as a traitor. He was unpatriotic. So you've got this big split about the West wanting to promote Einstein as this genius, as the good German, who's saying Germany, it's all Germany's fault, the Great War. So it's all propaganda thing again.
Well, that indeed would have been after the war in the years.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people in Germany were blaming others of various groups for their losing the war. But I think during the war, both Eddington and Einstein would have been unpopular with the masses of their countrymen because they were all whipped up to this, fervor of war against the enemy. And so in Germany, anybody who had pacific intentions would have been very unpopular. And also in England, anybody as well, they were supporting the government in imprisoning conscientious objectors.
But you're unpatriotic if you're sort of like a pacifist at that time. So you've got.
And then the other thing I didn't mention, but it might be relevant, is votes for women. They were coming in 1919 they came in as well.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of things, boiling up in the cauldron.
A lot of change was taking place, and in the physics, it was just part of that change as well. you change in society and the change in physics is suddenly, oh, the old physics we had from Newton, well, that's may have contributed to the problems. That way of thinking contributed to the problems of why we had this Great War, and so they were ready for a change, and the newspapers and that were cash joining in on that, sort of like, oh yeah, revolution in physics, revolution and everything else. Society is changing, and we're hopefully changing for the better, and we won't have any more wars. But of course, you had the backlash against that from the Hitler's group. The people who were supporting Hitler, that those people were the Germans, and they were saying that they shouldn't have lost World War One or Great War, and they wanted to have another go at it. So to a change, when changes happen, there's resistance to change. So you've got the two groups, the progressives who want the change, and then you've got the traditionalists who want to keep things. And at that time, the traditionalists was rather weakened because the traditional way of thinking had led to this Great War. And sort of like Einstein's change in the physics was sort of like able to come in when the traditionalists were rather weak.
I think all this is very so, but it's very disappointing, to say that rational science, which is physics, is the most exact science in that it can be
Yeah.
mathematized, it can be quantified, and total thing should be logical and just
Yeah.
based on evidence and experimental as well.
Yeah.
You validate your theories and so on. That this can be determined by maybe an accident of politics or an accident of war or an accident of sociology. This would not be accepted by people. They would say, no, there's nothing like that, because we've proved Einstein's theories by pure experiment and so on. And it's independent of sociology. But I think we're all in agreement, actually, that it might not have gained the same acceptance had it occurred at another time.
Yeah, exactly. It's all like all the forces for change had come together at that time, and it was the time was right for a change in physics. In the old system was Aristotle, and you would be emphasizing logic where the theory had to make sense. And suddenly, with Einstein coming in, his theory, well, people were looking at it, the common people, and many of them were saying it didn't make sense. But suddenly, it's sort of like, well, it doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense. It's what experiment shows. It's just your problems with trying to understand it. So they managed to hoodwink us with that. And there was no really big debate, as far as I can see, except for a few squabbles as to why should we make this change in physics. There was never
But
open.
what I can see in what you presented, Roger, is a group of people endorsed Einstein's theory.
Yeah.
And basically, this group was actually rejecting basically the scientific method that things have to make sense and be logical.
Yeah, that's right.
So that I'm wondering, you've called this group progressives. If you could characterize them in other, like who were really this group?
Okay, we got
Were
less
they
than a minute
chairmen
here.
of
We're gonna
departments of
we're gonna
major?
get cut off, Jim.
Yeah.
So we
Oh, okay. Well,
Einstein
just
was part of
general
this
question.
political
I'd like to
group.
know more about this group.
But we'll talk about it. We'll
It was a
talk about it
political
after
group.
the break.
Yeah. Okay. I'll
We
send
got
you the
less than a
link.
minute.
I'll send you the link to
And we
the.
might try the video with the next session if you
Yeah.
wish.
Thank you. Okay. Bye then. See you later. Yeah. Got less than 1 minute to go. So okay.
Who were they? Like department chairmen of major universities or things like that? Who were these people?
Yeah. So Einstein had a lot of friends, and Einstein was a political activist, so he was trying to get political change. So he had a big network of people that were pro his ideas, and that I think they were socialism, and it was what Hitler blamed for everything. Basically, this group. So they were sort of like communists and so forth. And a lot of Einstein's friends were Jewish, so Hitler was blaming all these Jewish people as well. And Einstein, that group, they were involved in doing things like political assassinations. It's sort of like it usually just gets blamed upon the people on the right, but these people were on the left and they were actually killing politicians that they didn't like. And Einstein was sort of like supporting that. So it all gets really nasty. But the basic idea goes back that if you've got all these governments in different countries and they start going to war among each other for different reasons. And so the basic idea is to get one world government. And I think that idea comes from H.G. Wells. I think he's another socialist. So basically, it was this group of people who had this idea that you want to unite the whole world in one world government, and then there would be no reason for wars. And of course, the people who are patriotic are just supporting your own individual countries, and that's you don't like that. You sort of like you resisting that. And so it's sort of all tied into the Cold War, where you start seeing the Soviet Union as trying to take over the world and put everybody under communism. But sort of Einstein was part of that. He was trying to get this one world government, and he's written books on socialism and so forth, stating his political views. When he fled from Germany because of Hitler, he went to America, and FBI kept a massive file on Einstein because they thought he was a communist. And it's well known for the contacts that he had with people, that a lot of them were communists. And so that's the sort of group he was involved with. But because he stood up to Hitler, he's a hero. Everybody goes, right, he's a Hitler, Hitler's evil. And Einstein stood up to him, and Einstein did do a lot of things like well, it was part of the thing he did was he wrote that famous letter saying build the atom bomb to the president of America. So suddenly when he's doing that, he's abandoning pacifism. So that's what Einstein is like. He's presented as this very good person, but on the other side of it, he had his enemies. And it's on that side, you got the people like Hitler and all the other Nazis. And the attack on him was from Leonard, who was really the top physicist at the time, and he takes the side of the Nazis. So that is the terrible mess that physics came under. The more you look at it, the more unpleasant.
Certainly after the war, and I've said this before, the world came to a consensus, and it didn't matter whether you were a left-wing communist or whether you were a right-wing, statist or whatever. Relativity, SRT and GRT became accepted worldwide. Didn't matter whether it was in the Soviet Union or in McCarthy, USA, or in Europe or whatever. It was accepted worldwide. There was no dissent.
I thought in America they didn't really like communists after World War II, and it all suddenly became the Cold War, and you had things like McCarthy witch hunts of communists, and Oppenheimer, who was in charge of building the atom bomb for the Americans. He was accused of being a communist, and they had a big witch hunt against him, and it was in the recent film Oppenheimer. So sort of like that ruined his career, that a lot of the people he knew were communists, his friends, even though they couldn't.
That's the very point I'm making.
Yeah.
That even in that atmosphere, relativity was unquestioned. It was accepted. So it was accepted in the Soviet Union and it was accepted in the United States.
Well,
This anti-communist era.
well, I don't think McCarthy attacked relativity itself. He was attacking the communists. And if that had gone further and he attacked the communists, then maybe he would have carried on to attack communist science. You got the problem that Einstein was a hero. So McCarthy wouldn't have necessarily attacked Einstein as being a hero who stood up to Hitler. And Einstein was coming forward and trying to defend people like Oppenheimer, who were accused of being communists. So Einstein was on their side on that sort of thing. They didn't get down. You had it as a big political thing, a big fight against the communists, but it didn't then get down to the basics of the science. The fundamental.
I'm sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, sorry.
My perception is that you had academia in general, particularly in Europe, was infected by socialism.
Yeah.
You know, you had John Maynard Keynes and economics, and he was involved in the economic recovery plans and the reparation plans. You know, and they were all. The academic community was all enthralled with socialism, I think, at that time. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think like if you're going to study political philosophy, one of the things I think you need to study is Karl Marx's books on things, because that basically gives his version of the history from the point of view of the proletariat and all that sort of thing. So even if you want to disagree with all that, you still got to be aware roughly of what those ideas are. And many of the people, when they start reading about those ideas from Marxism, they start believing in it. So
I think the answer to your question, Jim, is that the people that he's talking about are the academic community, the left-leaning academic community, the people in Cambridge and the people in the European universities, the academic people, and I think probably also in the United States. But you also had, which you didn't really talk about, which is the philosophy, the logical positivism that arose at about this time in philosophy, and they sort of they sort of brought Einstein under his wing, and they sort of, there was this kind of idea that Einstein's theory was an example of logical positivism,
yeah,
which was being promoted at the time by some pretty famous guys. I'm trying to think of the names. There's a whole list of logical positivists that
yes,
were important at that time. But the other point I wanted to make,
Skinner, I think, is one. Skinner.
You should know the answer to this, Robert.
No, positivist.
Ayers.
Yeah, A.J. Ayer had his verification principle.
And
Carnap, Reichenbach, Mach was an early one. Though my understanding was Einstein first liked Mach and then turned away from him.
Right.
So you look for consistency on Einstein's positions, it just isn't there.
Einstein is
right,
Einstein is supposed to have changed his philosophical point of view. So I think in 1905 time he was going from the philosophy of logical positivism, but then when he formed general relativity, he changed his philosophical point of view. So I think he wasn't going so much along with the idea, but it leaves people open then to just look at what he's saying in the earlier period of 1905 and saying, yeah, that fits with my logical positivism point of view. But then the people, if they look at the later view, can see different things there. They can see that as fitting in their point of view. So Einstein's able
Another
to,
one who changed all over the place was Bertrand Russell.
Right.
He started out even as a Hegelian, then he became a positivist,
yeah,
and as far as I see, he certainly became a physical realist.
but Einstein changing
Well,
his,
but that was a popular theme at the time that Einstein, and then a lot of people identified Einstein's work as being logically in line with logical
yes,
positivism, the
yeah,
Vienna Circle, and I forget who were the prominent people in the Vienna Circle.
Like Aaron Carnap, Schlick,
Right,
Reichenbach.
hmm
and they sort of created his special theory of relativity was kind of became their model of
yeah,
logical positivism in science.
yeah,
And so that was, I think, an important aspect of it because they
mhm.
could say, this new theory in physics is in line with our philosophical viewpoints.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
I think that was influential
Yeah,
as
but
well.
that's where they reject the ether. They want to reject metaphysical ideas, which can't be explicitly shown by experiment. So that's where they
Right.
reject that. But when you read Einstein, he seems to take that stance, but in 1920, he seems to backtrack, and that's when they talk about he's changed his philosophical point of view. So for the logical positivists, they like the early Einstein, and it's the later one they're not so happy about. But
Have you
change,
go ahead?
Einstein changing his mind makes him ambiguous, and people can read different things into it, so they can have different point. They can see their point of view reflected from Einstein. Just they just have to decide which parts they want to reject.
I think that's important. I think he's so flexible and ambiguous in what he says that you can embrace it
Mhm.
or attach yourself to it and say, yeah, that's right, I believe that.
S-
And
Sort of like
You've
Einstein.
certainly got both atheists and theists
Yeah,
claiming Einstein as their leader.
yeah,
They get certain quotations that he says, and
yeah,
it seems to support their positions. Einstein said he believed in Spinoza's God, which is like
hmm
a sort of a polytheistic type thing, but not in
Well,
an
no,
empirical God.
no. For Spinoza, God's the universe.
Yes, yes.
that deist, isn't it? Something
Anyway, Einstein said he believed in that, which is like everything. It's a
pantheist.
okay, pantheist, I said.
Yeah,
Yeah, pantheist universe. Yeah, but the other thing about socialism, by the way, is that it was in the air. It was
yeah,
fashionable to say one was a socialist. In fact,
yes,
it was quite unacceptable to say one was against socialism. So
hmm
even Hitler said, "I'm a socialist.
yeah,
My system is National
yeah,
Socialism."
Right.
That right and left took socialism as
yeah,
their
yeah.
keyword.
But not communist socialism. So, yeah, so the whole thing is a big mess of change going on at that time, and Einstein was able to cash in on it.
Is
And
it too simple to say that basically this group of people that were early on endorsing Einstein's theory
mhm,
uh, really had some other motive other than the science itself? In other words, there were really, I'm getting that this is a group of people uh, perhaps just wanting to promote their own power, as maybe Harry intimated. Um, is that just too simple a view of what
I,
you
I,
were
I,
saying?
I think it's just they saw that Einstein's relativity was fitting into their political and philosophical points of view on things because it was this change coming about.
Of this group that
Yeah,
endorsed him.
yeah, they were probably reading some of the similar things to what Einstein was reading. They're probably reading Karl Marx. They're probably reading these other philosophers that were around at the time, and they were probably just seeing it as fitting into their ideas of what they wanted to believe about politics and philosophy and so forth.
okay, one of the things I want to point out here is that you don't talk about Minkowski that
Yeah.
much. And I think we need to really understand that Minkowski kind of comes into the picture, and he provides the mathematical justification
Yeah.
for the theory of relativity.
Yeah.
When you go to the textbooks and they talk about four vectors and space time and all that, that's Minkowski.
Yeah.
And
But
Minkowski, it's surprising to me that he doesn't get the credit. It's Einstein's theory of relativity, but in reality, it seems to me it really should be Minkowski's theory of relativity,
well, Paul
because he does the mathematics.
Paul Minkowski didn't live long enough. So
Correct.
and Minkowski, what his point of view was, his point of view was that Einstein was wrong, and what he was presenting was his own theory. And Einstein was saying that Minkowski's theory was wrong. And then Einstein then later accepted what Minkowski was saying, and then this incorporated it into his general relativity. So basically, Minkowski dying so young wasn't able to give his point of view on things. And so Einstein just sort of like took it over.
Yeah, but really it's Minkowski's theory. The math is Minkowski's
Yeah.
math. And Einstein adopted it later
Yeah.
and used it in general relativity, although Einstein, as I understand it, initially resisted the Minkowski
Yes.
mathematics.
So
And
it was really, if you talk about it too much, special relativity 1905, then Minkowski's theory later was really supposed to be a different theory. But you can look at it in terms of Einstein changing his point of view.
It's also interesting to note that Minkowski was actually Einstein's mathematics teacher.
And he was the one calling
What's the
Einstein.
relationship?
He was the one calling Einstein a lazy dog. Einstein used to skip loads of classes because Einstein used to go to these coffee houses where he could talk all the bohemian stuff about politics and all that. Einstein wasn't so interested in the physics lessons. He wasn't very.
But
Einstein
we
was.
also note, the general acceptance of this, including the scientific profession in general. Maybe for political reasons, maybe for financial reasons. But there's a significant list of scientists who questioned the special theory of relativity in particular later there, and in fact didn't accept it, starting from Michelson himself, whose experiment is meant to be the basis to SRT. He never accepted relativity. He said this is a monster which I'm sorry I appear to have created. He never accepted it. And then you can keep on going. Rutherford, for example, he poo-pooed it. And it was said to him, oh, no Anglo-Saxon can understand relativity. He said, yes, jolly good job as well.
Yeah.
And his very eminent pupil, Soddy, he didn't accept it either. And then, of course, people like, Tesla and well, you can keep on going. There are a lot of very eminent
Tesla
people.
hasn't got too much writings on Einstein. There's not that much written.
That's true, but he didn't appear to accept people like Ives. It's frequently suggested in the literature that Herbert Ives was instrumental in confirming relativity, but he actually rejected it.
Yeah. Michelson, he did meet Einstein eventually, and Einstein and that agreed that the ether existed. So by that time, Einstein had changed his views, but that sort of thing never seemed to filter through. And they're still going by what the early Einstein was saying, and they're saying there's no ether.
There was a bigger difference between Dayton Miller, and Einstein when they met.
Yeah.
Because actually Einstein admitted that if Miller's experiments were correct, his theory.
Yeah, but Einstein had sent a friend or something to check up on Miller's work, and the friend had come back saying Miller's work was wrong. So Einstein was going by that. So Einstein didn't believe in Miller's work.
And then Miller's pupil Shankland, who actually got custody of all of the original records when Miller died, he became a very enthusiastic relativist. And
Hmm.
he wrote, there's a famous paper he wrote in 1955, which it seemed to indicate that Miller's experiments were all rubbish because
Hmm.
he didn't take temperature variation into
Yeah.
account and so on. But what's even worse is it appears now, I don't know, we don't have proof of this, but it appears that Shanklin destroyed the original records that
Hmm.
Miller made.
I don't know. I mean, when somebody does an experiment and if you don't agree with it, you start arguing that there's something wrong with the way the experiment's been done. I mean, there was a recent one, wasn't it, about 10 years or more ago, about, they detected particles going faster than the speed of light, which was so demolished special relativity, so say. But then they said, we looked at it again, and now the experiment wasn't done properly. The cables weren't connected properly and something like that. So that
That
when
was the muon experiment that
yeah,
they discovered the muon,
yeah,
not muons, neutrino,
yeah,
and they and supposedly the claim was that the fiber optic connection to I think the GPS receiver or something was bad, and
yeah.
it was loose, and that made the claim that it was they were traveling faster than the speed of light disappeared, but they never really put out a explanation in detail of how it was just like, well, we found this
I think,
problem with the loose connector, and so
yeah, I think
that made it go away.
I think the answer would have been to redo the experiment, but I think the argument against that was it would have been a waste of money.
I don't
You
remember what the resolution of
yeah.
that was.
Well, they decided the experiment was faulty, so it didn't
Right.
But you seem to get this in any experiment. It's sort of like any experiment which, say, proves Einstein's relativity. We just didn't say, well, that couldn't have been done properly. And then any experiment which comes along, which, say, disproves Einstein in the relativity side of things, then the mainstream start going, that experiment could have been done properly. So experiments, you start ending up arguing over them. But from the philosophy of science, which Einstein brought about, that the experiments are supposed to be interpreted in this weird philosophical way, and that's what protects him a lot. So
Now
even
let's
even if you adding, there's extra effects in an experiment, even if you're saying there's extra effects, then that gets added on to Einstein's relativity, and it's supposed to be still interpreted from the relevant philosophy.
okay. I wanted to go back to Leonard a bit. As I
Yeah,
recall, I tried to read some of his stuff many years ago,
yeah,
and it's probably been 20 years now. It seems to me that he raised the issue of the twin paradox and the paradoxes, and he tried to raise that as an issue, and that didn't get very far. Do you recall this?
well, I think it was better. The twin paradox thing was better taken up by Herbert Dingle, but then the mainstream.
That was much later.
Yep,
We're talking.
Leonard is not really a very nice person to start referring to because he's got this bad reputation. But
Well, that's how they smeared him when
yeah,
he was raising these issues about problems with special relativity.
yeah.
I think one
So
of the issues that he was harping on was the twin paradox problem
yeah,
and the paradox issue. And they didn't have an answer to that, so they smeared him as being a
yeah.
Nazi,
Well, he
and etc.
was. I think he was. So it's sort of like if you
Well,
go
it
by
was a smear campaign, essentially.
so if you go by well, Leonard was right. It's almost like saying Hitler was a nice person. So he's not. It's pretty dirty to look at. But Herbert Dingle, he did deal with the issue, and they managed to dismiss him as well. Mainstream has this way of getting rid of people who have, well, just it's dismissing the arguments that people have about Einstein being wrong on relativity. They manage their method of doing it. It's all goes back to their philosophy. Their philosophy is rather messed up. They're not going by uh, the earlier philosophy of physics science, which would have been more focused upon having logical, coherent descriptions of what's going on. And in my talks, I've tried to point that out, but I was probably getting confused that the issue when I've talked to AI, artificial intelligence, I managed to get ChatGPT to say yes, the metaphysics of special relativity and that's a mess. And if you were going by the old philosophy before Einstein, that would have meant the theory was wrong. But in modern terms, they tend not to. Want to ignore that. That's not important anymore. So they're just going by can they fit experiments to the mathematics they got, and they ignore the metaphysical mess.
But in other circumstances, with the advent of logical positivism and the wish to divorce modern philosophy and science from older, ideas of Saint Augustine and scholasticism and so on, you would imagine that they would have associated relativity with that, obscurantist type medieval philosophy, and they would have rejected it because it doesn't follow the sort of logical positivist type thinking as far as I can see.
I think when they call it logical positivism, it's a bit of a misdemeanor because the logic is not that clear to me. It's not Aristotelian logic, and in the scholasticism, it being Aristotelian logic. So they got their own peculiar logic, which they're going by, which doesn't really make sense.
Well, they invented there's a new logical method under logical positivism, which brings in the operational method and the operational approach, which was advocated by Bridgman. Bridgman wrote that book about that, which I think is the ultimate word on that topic. And, so that, since everything is defined operationally, they managed to essentially interpret Einstein's postulates operationally.
Yeah.
Okay. In accordance with this new philosophical way of looking at things. And because, of course, Minkowski had already developed a mathematical system that, appeared to be logically consistent mathematically. So it was kind of hard for critics to really break down this system. And I think that was one of the problems Leonard had, where he was sort of trying to talk about the paradoxes, and they just pushed that aside by a smear. He's a Nazi, et cetera. And I think that played well with the academics who really basically didn't like the old German conservative right wing. I think that's how that got pushed aside by the smear campaign. What's more interesting, though, I think, is the business with Henry Bergson and how they sort of dealt with him. And they kind of pushed him aside, but they were very careful because he was Jewish not to slander him. And they used a rather different technique to essentially neutralize him.
I think they dismissed him as just talking philosophy, and Einstein said something about that philosophy is not part of his physics or something like that. So they managed to distance it from what Bergson was saying.
Right. Before that, Bergson was the philosophical expert on time. He'd had a theory about time, and he was the acknowledged philosophical expert on that issue. And then Einstein comes along and says, time is relative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess Bergson didn't really challenge that until the 1920s when he wrote that book, Duration and Simultaneity. But by that point, Einstein had become entrenched, and his arguments really basically fell on deaf ears.
They managed to dismiss the philosophical arguments and just saying that the theory of Einstein was fitting with the experiments. So it's all this squabbling again over things.
Right. You have this sort of waffle between,
Yeah,
if you say it's not logical and it doesn't make sense,
yeah,
they say, but it's proved by experiment. So
exactly.
therefore,
And one of the things they say is there's no reason for nature to have to make sense to a human mind. So
right.
they're pushing it back onto the person's way of thinking. Or you don't make sense to you as a person. That's just because your human mind is not able to put it into a way that makes sense. And
Well,
nature
you don't
doesn't.
understand relativity.
Yeah.
That's the typical one.
So the emphasis is on, or if you don't believe it, it doesn't make sense to you. The problem is you, the person thinking that. You've got to try to work through it and try to make sense of it. So it's a pushback thing. Really, sort of like from our point of view, I think most of us distance where we've looked at it, it doesn't make sense, therefore it must be wrong. But that point of view is not accepted by the mainstream. Instead, they want to push it back as a person's saying that, but they're just not clever enough to understand relativity.
Which is kind of probably what they said to Leonard.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
well,
think
they attacked him. They attacked him. They managed to dismiss him as a evil person. He's a racist and so forth. So,
yeah, that was kind of icing on the cake.
yeah, he's sort of like, oh, he doesn't understand it because he's an evil person.
Yeah,
Yes,
it was hard to attack him because his credentials, scientific
Yeah,
credentials, were very high.
yeah,
But you could use an ad hominem argument. Oh, he's such
yeah,
a wicked person that it's blinded him to the truth
yes.
of this.
It was if you get these people who are closed-minded and sort of like Leonard was sort of closed-minded and not open to new ideas. Leonard
I
believed he
think they
was,
used the reverse technique on Bergman, where they
yeah,
couldn't really use the smear campaign because he
yeah,
was Jewish.
yeah.
And they sort of used the you don't really understand what you're talking about
Yeah, well,
approach.
I don't think Bergson has presented any experimental evidence for his point of view. So it was he wasn't able to get to the physics side of things instead of just being on the philosophy.
Well, he was more of a philosopher,
Yeah,
wasn't he, rather than a physicist? And
yeah,
that was a weak point. They could
yeah.
attack him.
They can
Well,
dismiss it.
he tried to attack it from the point of view of its logical integrity, and he
Yeah,
pointed out that it was not did not have logical integrity, but
yeah,
they brought up all the usual. They had this guy who was not a major player. Einstein never really attacked him directly,
yeah,
although Einstein did comment on his work. Um, the technique was to have a guy who wasn't really prestigious, he wasn't Einstein himself, to refute Bergman, and so he brought up the usual arguments, relativity of simultaneity, etc., and
yeah,
the usual stuff. And so that's how, but they didn't attack him, politically,
yeah,
because they couldn't call him a Nazi. That
yeah.
was he was French and
You can,
Jewish.
if you're desperate, what they say is that you're a Jew that hates Jews. If a Jew hating Jew. So, but they get pretty desperate when they get to that. Most of the time, they don't want to say horrible things about Jewish people. But part of the problem in the logic side of it is Aristotle's logic. There's the excluded middle, and part of what Einstein seems to be doing is bringing in this idea. Well, there's the answer is not just yes or no, but it's also something in the middle, and that sort of like gets incorporated into quantum physics, where you've got the idea
Yeah.
of wave particle duality. From Aristotelian logic, it would be, oh, is it a particle or is it a wave? But it can't be both. But quantum physics says it's both, so it's the kind of the excluded middle. So it's all part of this ongoing process in physics. They messed it up. They've messed up the philosophy of science physics in order to accommodate Einstein. And now that they've changed all that from what it was originally, it's very difficult to attack Einstein in a way that the mainstream would understand.
in outdated quantum mechanics, they not only go so far as to say that a particular person does not understand it, they actually claim that it is not understandable, period. And
Yeah,
that's the
yeah,
very essence of it. And so that
yeah,
the whole question of whether it's logical is thrown out the window.
yeah,
It's not even a valid question
yeah.
because it can't be understood, is what the claim is.
Yeah, they sometimes like to advertise that. Oh,
And physics is
yeah,
sort of the, in some way, some people say that physics is sort of the supreme science, the ultimate science,
yeah,
whereas biologists and chemists and other scientists have a whole lot more curiosity. They demand explanations, they
yeah.
demand understanding, they demand logic. It seems that the whole culture in physics, none of these things is valued anymore.
When they advertise physics experiments, sometimes they say this is incomprehensible to the ordinary way of thinking about it, and they say that that is a big selling point for it. We've done this experiment and something really weird's happened in this experiment with these particles,
Exactly
or
what
it's
I'm saying,
in
Roger.
quantum
Yes,
entanglement. It's all very weird, but it's incomprehensible to our way of thinking about things. But it's actually what the experiment shows, and they like to advertise it like that. Oh, the experiment's incomprehensible. Oh, but actually we got it.
So
So all
they've given
publicity.
way to being actors, if you like, because chemists and phys and biologists, they haven't become showmen to the populace at large. But the physicists have certainly early on in the last century, and everybody was hanging upon the words of the physicists, and they were considered the higher level of scientists and so on. And they were acting to that. They were making the case, and they were writing books, and they were appearing. Einstein was asked to appear in Variety at the London Palladium. So
Yeah,
they were literally becoming showmen, and
Einstein's the
enacting
first
to the audience.
superstar.
Yeah.
Einstein.
backing up what Ian just said,
Yeah.
I think if you look at a feed of YouTube videos,
Hmm.
you just don't see a whole lot about from chemistry and biology and other hard sciences, medicine and so forth, physiology and whatnot. You see a whole lot of propaganda videos promoting crazy physics ideas.
Yeah. There's a lot of publicity, propaganda still on Einstein. Einstein is hero worshipped. So,
Well, you have the once you get into cosmology,
hmm,
okay, which is the relativity is supposedly general relativity is the basis for modern cosmology.
yeah,
That's a great field for gee whiz science.
yeah, the,
Um, you've got black holes now. That's accepted. Um, I can remember when black holes were kind of skeptical, viewed
yeah,
skeptically, but now it's just, oh, that's just a normal phenomenon of the universe.
yeah.
And there's lots of room for gee whiz stuff in
Yeah,
cosmology and astrophysics, and it's full of that.
yeah. The,
Uh,
the popularizers of science which come on telly, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, they just uh, put on the
okay,
dovetails
we're
of,
gonna we're in the less than a minute
yeah.
range here, so we're gonna get cut off here.
And
Okay,
they
so
say, I know, they say how much a genius Einstein is, and that reflects back on them and makes them appear a genius as well.
okay. So do we want to continue on with this discussion? Jerry, you haven't said anything, and Bob, you haven't really made many comments.
Well, let's see. Roger, you had a slide, I think, on the philosophy of science where you mentioned Howard.
Yeah, that's one of the philosophers.
Is that Don Howard?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Because I knew
Einstein
him at
scholar.
Boston University. He had the same thesis advisors as I
Yeah,
did. But he made a career for himself. I think he was at Notre Dame and he
yeah,
was head of the Philosophy of Science Association. but he's a very strong anti-realist. And like I know with Shimoni's work on quantum correlations,
Yeah.
he did a philosophy thesis saying that that was strong evidence for anti-realism, and Shimoni changed his mind from realism to anti-realism as a result. Whereas I think it's a good evidence for something like a special reference frame, which doesn't accord very well with Einstein.
Yeah. Yeah. He's a big Einstein fan, isn't he, Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he was connected because I did that. I think I mentioned also at Boston University, the Center for like working with on the Einstein papers. I think he
Yeah.
was head of that.
Yeah. So most of everything that comes through academia is a bias towards Einstein being a genius on relativity.
Well, I think according to what your thesis is that academia is what created him. He's their hero. He created they created the acceptance of his theory.
Yeah.
The academic people, and that's their little club. And then they extended that out to general relativity after the Eddington claims to
Yeah.
have verified the general relativity, and so he's their pet boy, I think.
Yeah.
But perhaps it really started with the general relativity, 1919, as we said, because I'm wondering. I think between 1905 and 1919, or certainly 1915, the idea was this is a bit of a crazy theory. Maybe there's something in it. It's an interesting German scientist, but perhaps it's very weird. We'd have to give it a lot of thought. It only became sort of gospel after 1919.
Yeah.
So it was the political undercurrent which led to all the academics accepting it and becoming orthodoxy.
Right. Now, a couple of points I want to make is that a lot of books claim that the theory his special relativity had become accepted by 1911. And that's, I'm not really quite sure that that's really true. But I think the other point to remember is that Minkowski had already promoted, Minkowski's ideas, his mathematics had been accepted, I think, at this point. And so, it became a natural thing to sort of adopt his mathematics of space-time to the general theory of relativity, which is what I think Einstein did. And published that in 1916. I did want to raise this issue here. This is regarding the Frédéric Lassiaille talk yesterday, and he sort of was low. He was talking about the surrounding theory of surrounding, which sounded like an ether theory, but he refused to say that it was an ether theory. But anyway, my point, he wanted to stick to the mainstream general relativity idea. I still don't understand, after years and years and years, I don't understand how general relativity explains gravity. I'm still puzzled by how this works. I don't understand how general relativity explains gravity.
In other words, that it's not a force. It's a curvature.
Correct. It's not a force. And I've told the story many times where I went to this lecture at a local lecture here at the Jefferson Lab. I don't know if you're familiar with Jefferson Laboratory, but we have Jefferson Laboratory, which is a accelerator laboratory where they do nuclear acceleration experiments. And the guy gave a talk about Einstein, and there was a big room full of people, and he announced that gravity is not a force. And all these people were like going like, what are you talking about? What do you mean gravity is not a force? Einstein, gravity is not a force. So how does, I don't understand, according to general relativity, how gravity works. I'm still puzzled by that. So my question would be, how can a theory that doesn't explain how gravity works become accepted? Do you have any thoughts on that, Roger?
Well, I thought it was supposed. I thought it's sorry. I thought it's supposed to be that it's supposed to be space-time curvature, and that's a sort of like descriptive of what's going on. And
I
we,
don't know what that means.
oh, well, if you go back to special relativity, we formed this thing called space-time.
That's
Do you know?
Minkowski, by the way.
Yeah, space. Minkowski got space-time, and space-time in that is flat. And by that it means it's Euclidean. You got Euclidean geometry is really three-dimensional space, but they sort of like add an extra dimension on to make it four-dimensional. So it's four-dimensional Euclidean, and that's flat. The lines are straight lines. So and when it goes to curved, that's supposed to then be uh, general relativity. So you get curved.
Yeah, but I don't understand how space is curved. I just don't
Well,
get it.
that's supposed to be one of the mysteries, isn't it? So not everybody can understand this. It's that space is sort of like a geometry. It's not really
So
something
it's
we.
just really a theory of geometry. It's not
Yeah,
really a.
yeah,
It's just mathematics and geometry. It's not
yeah.
really physics. So
Well,
it's not. So you can't
Well,
say
yes,
it's
it's just
realism.
taking Riemannian geometry and sort of extrapolating it to the real world. This idea.
yeah. It's
But my
it,
point is, I don't understand how curving space time causes planets to stay in orbits.
yeah,
I don't understand. I mean, to me, the Newtonian idea, which of course Newton said that he doesn't really know what this force of gravity is because he
yeah,
doesn't feign hypotheses.
yeah,
See, I think your point might be that when they give this model of a rubber sheet which is hollowed in the middle,
yeah.
and they say, "Well, you put a ball in that goes into the center." You're saying, but you need a force to impinge upon that to make the ball go towards the center.
Well, I understand it intellectually in the sense that yeah, they're saying that this tensor field thing, whatever a
Yeah,
tensor field is, causes a mass object to move in a certain direction according to the mathematics that it obeys. But that just seems to me to be creating an idealistic mathematics. The world is really based on mathematics. It's the world follows Lagrangian equations. There's no physical reality there. It's all just idealism and mathematics and equations. What's the reality of what's happening physically? You don't. We're not told.
Well, see, the beauty of classical physics is that it's both. You can express the way the world works in terms of Lagrangian dynamics. That's very true. But then you can actually translate it to forces and momentum and energy that we can observe in everyday life. But the difference with the modern the GRT business is you have all these tensor fields and mathematics and Riemannian geometry, but it's not translated into everyday phenomena such as mechanical forces and so on.
That's why I say I don't understand how it works.
Well, I think one way it works is the dirty little secret that when you add more variables, such as by using tensors, three-dimensional matrices, you can fit almost anything to it, and and so you lose credibility big time.
Right. So I guess I would present this question to Roger. Do you
yeah.
think that this mathematical mysticism and the fact that you have to be this super intelligent person, I mean, about what was it, Eddington? I forget who said that only three people that understand general relativity or
Yeah.
something that understand relativity. I forget the details of that story. Only very smart people in academia who are geniuses can understand this theory.
Well, it's mathematical. So not everybody understands mathematics. And the problem is you're writing these equations, and then how do you interpret that into physical terms? And so when they're writing these equations, sort of like space-time, 4 dimensions, and they suddenly say, oh, yeah, that's Euclidean geometry in 4 dimensions. And then sort of like, well, you can start like curve those dimensions in a different geometry, like spherical geometry or um, uh, Riemann geometry. So you can start like form all these different sorts of mathematical systems. And basic things like, oh, infinity, well, that's a hard mathematical concept to understand for people, and there's just loads of mathematical things that are hard to understand.
But you were talking about Minkowski's work with regard to the development of four-dimensional space and so on. But the mathematicians were rather responsible for advancing, if that's the correct word, some of these general relativity concepts. What's that Italian person, Levi Setta? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. A number of these mathematicians, so much so that Einstein is reputed to have said, since the mathematicians got a hold of my general relativity theory, I don't understand it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And that could be seen as mathematical corrections to his theory.
we don't
But
know
even
whether he was
developing things,
talking
he
about
probably wouldn't
special or
be
general
capable of having
relativity.
them.
Yeah. I mean,
I,
Einstein wasn't that good at mathematics, but his fan
Yeah,
club.
exactly. These are very advanced concepts
Yeah.
in tensor.
Sometimes his fan base accepts that Einstein wasn't very good at mathematics, but a lot of his fan base thinks he was a mathematical genius.
well, yeah. I think one of the issues now is I've noticed that recently I was puttering around on Vixra, and there's a guy that claims that Einstein's general relativity is wrong, and he's disproved it with the mathematics. And it's pretty interesting. I mean, the guy he understands this tensor mathematics and all this stuff. So, what I find interesting is even expert mathematicians like the gentleman that we had talking to the CNPS yesterday, Frédéric Lassiaille is his name, I think.
Yeah.
He seems to know about general relativity and all these equations, and he doesn't agree with it. Um, so, kind of what we're finding now is that it's not mysticism to a large number of people anymore. In other words, the select group of people who understood general relativity isn't a small group of people anymore. It's become spread out. More people are educated in college on the mathematics of this theory, and we're finding more and more people in the dissident community that just don't believe in general relativity, and there are people who understand the mathematics of general relativity.
Yeah, I mean, the mathematics is advanced, but it's not that arcane. And it is strange. I think we've probably all been through this experience that in college, they didn't deal with it. They always said, oh, that's for general relativity, which is beyond the scope of our undergraduate course. They didn't deal with it. And all we tell you is that there are a few tests which have proved it. And they talk about the mercury and the other effects, the perihelion and so on. But they say we're not going to deal with general relativity theory. Whereas if you were doing a physics or engineering course, I think possibly in the latter years of your undergraduate career, you could be introduced to these concepts if they are so important and so logical. They're not so arcane, but they've been kept secret. So as you say, there are very few people who are willing to talk about it, such as this Lassiaille guy yesterday. There's so few people who are willing to delve into it. They say, "Oh, that's beyond me. I don't understand that. I was never taught that in my college years."
There is postgraduate degrees, so I think it's supposed to be gone into past the undergraduate level into the higher staff of relativity.
Well, you get people like that Australian gentleman whose name I've forgotten,
Stephen,
I think, what's it? You probably remember his name, Harry.
yeah, Stephen Crothers.
Yeah, that's it, Stephen Crothers. Yes, he was dismissed basically because he started questioning all these formulae, and he's gone
Yeah.
He
into
says that
detail.
black hole, the mathematics of black holes is incorrect.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So you do have critics of the mathematical formulation,
Yeah.
okay, and uh, they're not really making much traction. I got the impression that Frédéric Lassiaille is, he was saying he couldn't get his papers published.
Yeah.
I found his discussion, what he was talking about, I didn't really understand a lot of what he was talking about because he seems to have invented a new terminology where he, instead of talking about ether, he says surrounding.
Yeah.
I would have preferred him to use the word cosmic medium, according to Vladimir, rather than the surrounding.
I think
think
some of
his
those terms
papers,
might be translated from French because I mean he didn't know what a fudge factor was, and then the strange thing is all this timeless and out of vogue or something. These seem to be negative comments on his papers.
plus he did not really explain that I could see why he thinks that general relativity predicts that the G constant, the capital G constant, is variable.
Well, he's not unique in that. That's Hoyle also has a theory of that.
Yeah.
And
I
make
just
the
warn you,
connection.
without finalizing things, I'm in discussion with him about coming back and explaining that in a bit more detail, a bit more mathematically.
Yeah.
yeah, I think the bottom line though is, Jim, to answer your question, you probably have to, you should probably go back and see the discussion, the recording of his presentation. And I remember seeing that, and I didn't really understand much of it. And I do agree with you, Ian. I think the language issue is a kind of a problem. Um, I think it suffers in translation from French to English.
Yeah.
For future topics, I don't know whether it would be interesting. There's this a Dutch astronomer, Beatrice Villarreal. I put her name spelling in the comments. Who has some interesting work about disappearing objects in the view of the sky, and from plates taken before any satellites were ever launched. And so that she's identified slides or plates, I guess she calls them, of the night sky and at two different times. And this is all before any satellites were ever launched. So that whatever's changing up there wouldn't be stuff that we put there or moved around or whatever. And so that's a very, very interesting work. And she's received a lot of criticism for her work, which seems scientifically to be very, very sound. And it might be interesting as a point of discussion here in this group to see what you all think. Another interesting topic is the 3I Atlas interstellar object, which seems to be approaching our solar system at the moment and is appearing to do a close pass by of Mars and Earth. And it seems to be a very, very strange, unusual object. So that might be interesting for the cosmology folks here to look into and discuss what they think might be going on with that. Just suggestions for possible future subject matter.
Yeah.
And as regards the Saturday talks, I think I may have alerted you in the past to the fact that my my roster was running out, and I actually informed David de Hilster that there would be a crisis at the end of September. But I've given him now a stay of execution because I have two more talks coming up. So but at the end of October, I think I'll be running out. So I would ask you maybe over the next month or two to perhaps help out with giving me suggestions as to whom I might contact to give talks.
I can give you some suggestions. I don't know whether they can be taken up on it. For instance, this guy, I can't remember his name, but I ran into, he's written a number of papers on VIXRA where he claims special and general relativity are wrong. And maybe you could contact him.
You don't remember roughly what his name was?
I'll send it. I'll email it to you.
Okay, thank you, Because I did contact a number of people. For example, Ru Yong Wang. I was quite anxious to have him talk to us, and he was very friendly and communicative, and he said he'd keep in touch with us, but he hesitated to talk. And I asked David Tome as well, whatever you think. I know a lot of people are arguing with him, but I asked him to talk. And the same, these people, and another one was Akinbo. He seems to have produced a paper recently, which I had a look at, and it's quite interesting. Using analytical means to look at the types of wave equations and so on. Those three people gave me this, what I think was the same answer. That they were a little hesitant because of maybe hearing problems or intonation or, and yet they seem to be all quite capable of writing emails. But
David Tome doesn't really want to participate in video discussions. He's made that clear over the.
Yeah, he's got hearing problems.
I think it was a hearing problem. He sort of hinted at that. Yeah.
Yes. I forget the story. He's told me about it before. I forget what the story.
Oh.
I think Akimbo might be interested. He's probably too busy. I think he gave a presentation before a number of years ago.
Oh, I think you might have mentioned that to me. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the Wang guy. I thought they might be a bit hesitant because English wasn't their first language, but I mean that hasn't frightened off the Indian chap we had, Sankar, and actually to refer to Lassiaille, when he talked in January, a number of people, maybe including you, Harry, I don't know, I even found it difficult to understand him.
Right.
I think we all did. And I had a chat with him. I said, look, I hope you'll forgive me, but you were just speaking too fast and we couldn't understand. And he said, thank you so much for that advice. I'm going to take it into account. And he successfully spoke yesterday where I think he was quite comprehensible.
Well, the Frédéric, I thought it was, I didn't have any problem understanding him talking. What I had a problem with, I didn't understand, he talked about the scattering of the universe, I think, and it said it was 100 giga years since the last scattering of the universe.
Oh, yes.
And I thought, what is he talking about? I think he meant Big Bang. I think he meant.
No, I think I think I took that to mean that whatever his systems were, they were well before the Big Bang. They were like 10 times the distance in time before the Big Bang. So presumably he didn't accept the Big Bang, certainly the chronology of it.
I couldn't understand what he was talking about. I didn't know what that meant. 100 years since what? I guess he had.
No, let's say the Big Bang is 13.8 giga years. So he's talking about things that happened 100 giga years.
Right. And I thought, well, what 100 giga years ago? He didn't seem to sort of say, well, the universe is eternal. It's just it's at least 100 giga years old, I think. I didn't understand that.
Right.
Okay, the guy's name that I've been talking about, three fatal errors in the relativity theory. This is at VIXRA, Jorma Jormaka. Jormaka is this guy's name.
Would you mind sending that to me? Because otherwise I'll have to get a pen and paper and write it down.
I'll send you. He's got a page at Vixra, and I'll send it to you. I'll just send you a link.
And I presume there'll probably be an email on the page. If there is, I can contact him.
Yeah, I think he's got an email. There's lots of comments where people are telling him that he's wrong and doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay. You don't know his origin. I mean, is he an
I don't know anything about him other than he says that he's a retired professor.
Okay.
So apparently,
well, as we know, those are the only people who really will stick their head above the parapet because their careers.
Well, he's retired, right? So he's retired. So now he's determined to point out all the mistakes in relativity.
A bit like Dingle.
He's been teaching it for 50 years, and now he's going to tell us what all the mistakes are. All right.
Yeah, in his academia to back him, really.
By the way, evidently we're not going to see that video today, but if you can just remind us of the title, we could maybe look at it ourselves in our spare time. Roger.
Well, the video, yeah, I'll send you the link to it. Okay.
Oh, you've sent it to us?
I can send you the link, yeah.
Would you mind? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it gets rather nasty because it points out how horrible the person Leonard is. He's not a very nice person.
Okay.
Well, that's not really an argument.
Well,
that's the classic ad hominem argument.
Well, we don't want to re-habituate him, do we? We want to make him a nice person.
Well, that's standard kind of.
And I mentioned before that they tried to do that with Newton in recent years.
Yeah.
Without any evidence for it, I can say, but they were trying to make out that he was a nasty person, short-tempered, and so
yeah,
on.
Well, they excused that he went mad, didn't he?
The contrary.
He went mad.
When his little dog Diamond overset a lamp in his rooms in Cambridge and destroyed a lot of his papers, he said he destroyed. The little dog. He said, "Oh, Diamond, Diamond, thou little knowest what damage is done." He destroyed the work of some considerable number of years, but he was very kind to the animal. He wouldn't get upset or anything. But anyway, they've recently tried to say that Newton was a short-tempered person who was instrumental in getting counterfeiters of money hanged under Queen Anne and so on, and that sort of thing. And he had there's any truth in that. They're trying to ad hominem.
There's a biography where this is. I have a copy of the biography where this is all documented. That you're talking about. He became master of the mint, and apparently, supposedly, according to the story, he sort of went drunk with power when he became master of the mint. That was apparently a powerful position in those days, and he persecuted people, etc., because he was a minister, or what do you call him in Britain, an agent of the king or something like that?
Yeah,
or he took the Queen's shilling in this case. But I mean,
he had the power of the king behind him. He was the
Queen Anne at that time, yeah. But it was quite nasty by modern standards, rightly so. But that was the system. I mean, he didn't execute counterfeiters. That was the system. It was a capital crime.
Yeah,
and he was master of the mint. Yes.
Yeah. Well, apparently that was a very powerful position in those days.
Yeah.
Right.
Save the British economy.
Well, okay. So we got 10 minutes here. Does anybody have any other comments on Roger's little talk here? I appreciate your giving it to us, Roger.
I could give the conclusions to it there. So what you really get throughout history is you seem to have these people who want change, and the progressives, and then there's other people, traditionalists, who want to keep things the same. And in the case of Einstein, they managed to get this change to physics, and the progressives, well, they're still looking for more change, but they want it built upon what Einstein did. Something like trying to change back to how physics was before Einstein. that's regressive. And so that's not the kind of change they're looking for. So that's what we're faced with. Suddenly, a lot of us are saying, oh, we shouldn't have made this change to Einstein's relativity. We should go back to, say, Newton's physics or Lorentz theory. But the people who are progressive don't want that change backwards. They want it a change forward. And so that's sort of like the mess we're in with everything.
Seems like a takeaway message of this whole discussion on the is hire a good publicist.
Oh,
Really?
Well, he had influence with the newspapers and that his friends or whatever somehow managed to get him into the news media as his genius. Big publicity campaign about it. And we, as dissidents, don't have sort of a lot of money behind us to suddenly portray ourselves as geniuses in the newspapers. So Einstein managed to tap into it. We don't seem to be able to tap into it.
It's hard to know how much of this came accidentally. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't think there's much evidence that Einstein started, when he was in the patent office from currying favor so that he would become some prominent individual. I mean, to quote Shakespeare, some men are born great, some men achieve greatness, and some men have greatness thrust upon them. I think, in a way, it's probably the last. Greatness was probably thrust upon him by
Hmm.
circumstances.
No, I don't think so much. He's with the when he was at university, his tutors didn't really look on him very favorably. He had a bad reputation, and sort of like he had friends, and sort of like some of his rich, influential friends managed to get him a job in the end at the as a patent clerk, despite the university giving him, I think, a bad reference. So he had his friends network who were helping him with everything. And he also is talking physics with his friends, and they called themselves the Olympia Academy. And so he was in this big network of people who were trying to promote somebody as a genius to be their figurehead of the group they were in.
But the circumstances, we were talking about socialism a little
Hmm.
while ago, but I mean, at the time, Zionism was a positive thing and it was being supported all over the world. And, the
Yeah,
fact that he had embraced it initially helped him. Now,
yeah,
now it's the devil incarnate. So if anybody was associated with that, it would ruin his career.
I
But in
don't know.
those days, I think it didn't do him any harm. And
He-
do you know that famous photograph of him in a motor car going through New York or something? I think there was like a a parade there.
yeah,
If you look carefully, I believe that he's in the first car. They're not actually looking at him. They're looking at Chaim Weizmann, the head of the Jewish National Agency, who was in the second car. They were there promoting Zionism in the
yeah,
first instance.
yeah. So Einstein was promoting Zionism. He was part of the fundraising for that,
That
and
helped.
and he got offered
Serendipitously,
the job of being president, I think, of Israel.
which he refused.
Yeah,
Yes.
but it's sort of like he was deep into that. He was into that sort of thing. It was his circle of influential people promoting him. And so if it wasn't him from this sort of group of people, it would have been somebody else like him.
And don't forget his hairdresser.
Yeah.
oh,
So even if he didn't stand up to be public face of this sort of movement, it would have been some other person that would have had to come forward. So they were promoting this socialism, Zionism, and all that, and he was backing it, sort of like the figurehead for it. And you should like say, oh, Einstein's a very clever person, and he's promoting socialism, and he's promoting Zionism, so that all helped as well. It's sort of like that influences people. They kind of think they don't want to. Many people don't want to look things too deeply, and if you just point out to them, this very clever person is telling you it's a good idea, then a lot of people just get buy into that.
he may have inculcated the visual aspect himself a bit later, because if you look at the early photographs, he's dressed immaculately, in a three-piece suit and very well groomed and so on. And then
Yeah,
later on, he comes to this slovenly, lot of hair and
yeah.
lecturing.
He had to go to these meetings and things and get presented with awards. So I suppose he would tidy himself up for that. It's just when he's more casual at home that he's going to be slovenly.
Well, he was giving lectures like in Cambridge.
Yeah,
It's very slovenly and
yeah.
untidy, and that was part of the image.
Yeah, that's
But
central casting.
maybe he didn't have the clothes then because he had to run away from Germany. He was fleeing from Hitler. So maybe he didn't have his full wardrobe.
When did that happen? Do you recall?
I don't remember the precise years for it.
1930 something.
Yeah.
I think it was early-ish. I don't think he left at the very last minute. And then he did a tour of the United States
Yeah.
long
Yes.
before that.
Well, I remember my father told the story that Einstein gave a talk to his high school class, appeared in his high school in Philadelphia, and which I always thought was interesting.
Would that have been early 30s or something?
I don't. That probably was in the 20s. Now that
Okay.
because my father was born in 1917, so 1930 he would have been 13 years old. So yeah, about 1930ish. Yeah, could.
Okay.
And I think it's kind of exciting, to have high school, to have Einstein give a talk to your high school. Wow.
Yes.
I think it
Another
wasn't.
takeaway message of Roger's talk today, I think, is that for a radically different theory to gather support and momentum, the best time for that to happen is in historical periods of great chaos, such as the World War I and the whole picture that Roger painted today.
Yeah.
So the question is when when are we going to have the next big, huge international crisis?
Ukraine.
Well, some people would say we're in one now.
Advocates of maybe we're at the beginning or in one now, as Harry says.
Yeah, Trump couldn't sort out Ukraine, could he? So Putin's just going on, and people were talking about
Well, there's more to
bringing
that.
cruise missiles now.
They're all talking about the European nations, Britain and France and Germany going bankrupt now. I don't know where that's coming from. And
same way with China.
Yeah.
In crisis.
I think the bankruptcy thing about the European countries is because they're supposedly talking about giving more money to Ukraine, and I think there's an opposition to that. So they're saying, well, you can't give more money to Ukraine; you're going bankrupt.
But it could be the emergence of a new empire. I mean, after the First World War, the British Empire was no longer the leader, and it was the American Empire which was coming up. And it appears now that the American Empire is going, and the new empire is the Chinese Empire. So maybe we can expect some new development in physics or in science. It follows new empires.
There were scientists in China saying that Einstein's wrong, wasn't there? I pointed out in one of my talks.
That's right.
So it could be a revolution from there. Changing physics, changing everything